It was one of those quiet Seattle nights when the rain didn't fall, but hovered in the air, a mist that blurred the city lights and made everything look softer than it truly was. Inside their apartment, the warm glow of the pendant lamp fell on the marble counter, where a half-empty bottle of Cabernet sat beside two untouched glasses. Daniel Harris was scrolling through emails, the faint hum of his laptop blending with the sound of Clara's footsteps pacing the living room. She'd been restless all evening, a pattern he'd noticed for weeks now. Her movements carried a tension he couldn't name. "Daniel," she said finally, her voice low, almost trembling. He looked up. Her hands were clasped together, fingers twisting the hem of her silk blouse, a nervous habit she had when she was hiding something. "What is it?" he asked softly, closing his laptop. For a second, she didn't answer. Her eyes darted to the window, where their reflections floated against the darkened glass. Two people who looked close, but stood worlds apart. Then came the words. "I slept with my ex last night." Time didn't stop. It fractured. The world didn't go silent. It became unbearably loud. Daniel didn't move, didn't blink. He only stared, as though her voice had come from a stranger in another room. She swallowed hard, tears already forming. "It was a mistake, Daniel. I was drunk and—" "Stop," he interrupted, his tone calm but sharp enough to cut through her sentence. "Don't explain. Not yet." He leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. He wasn't the type to yell, and that terrified Clara more than any outburst could. She took a small step forward, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I felt lost. You've been distant lately, and when Ethan reached out—" "Ethan." Daniel repeated the name slowly, as though tasting poison. "The one who cheated on you in college?" Her silence was answer enough. Daniel nodded once, a short, mechanical motion. He looked down at his hands, steady, still, betraying no emotion. "Okay," he said finally, exhaling softly. Clara blinked. "Okay?" "Yes," he said, standing up. "You told me the truth. That's something." He turned away, walked to the counter, poured himself a glass of wine. The sound of liquid hitting glass echoed like thunder in the quiet apartment. She followed him, desperate. "Daniel, please say something. Yell, scream, anything. Just don't be like this." He looked at her then, really looked. Not with anger, but with a kind of tired clarity. "You want me to scream so you can feel better about what you did. You want chaos because silence makes you face what you've done." Her lip trembled. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" he asked. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain outside began to fall, softly, as if the world had decided to cry for them. He placed the glass down and met her eyes. "You said it was last night?" "Yes." "So this morning, when you kissed me, before work, you'd already decided to tell me." "I couldn't live with it, Daniel. I thought honesty would be better than lying." He almost laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Honesty? You call this honesty? Clara, honesty isn't confessing after the damage is done. It's choosing not to do the thing that needs confessing." She turned away, tears streaking her cheeks. I know I ruined everything." Daniel's voice softened, though his words remained cold. "You didn't ruin everything, Clara. Just us." He walked to his study and disappeared inside. For a moment, she thought he was leaving, but then he returned, holding a small, cream-colored envelope. He handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, confused. He slipped his hands into his pockets. "A bill." Her brows furrowed as she unfolded the paper. It was neatly typed, precise, like everything Daniel did. "Invoice. Emotional investment and support rendered. Student loan assistance, $42,000. Business startup loan, $33,000. Wedding expenses, $15,000. Total, $90,000. Below that, a single handwritten note. Paid in love, now due in truth. Her hands trembled. Daniel, what does this supposed to mean? He looked at her quietly. It means congratulations. You just earned your $90,000 love bill. Don't do this, she begged. Please, don't turn this into some cruel joke. It's not a joke, he said. It's clarity. You put a price on what we had. I'm just showing you the balance sheet. She tried to reach for him, but he stepped back. Daniel, I made a mistake. One night doesn't erase 8 years. One night reveals what 8 years tried to hide. You think I didn't see the distance, the late texts, the silences at dinner? I just hoped I was wrong. He walked toward the door. Where are you going? She cried. To breathe. Because right now, every corner of this apartment smells like a lie. The door closed softly behind him, leaving Clara alone in the echo of her confession. She sank to the floor, clutching the invoice in her shaking hands. Outside, the rain grew heavier, tapping against the windows like a heartbeat. She whispered his name once, Daniel, as if saying it could summon back the man she had just broken. But the apartment stayed silent, the kind of silence that meant something had ended. In the kitchen, the 2 untouched glasses of wine still glimmered beneath the soft light, a toast that would never happen, a promise that had already expired. The morning light crept into the apartment like an uninvited guest, pale, cold, and indifferent. Clara woke up on the couch, her body stiff, her eyes swollen from the night's tears. The envelope still lay on the coffee table, the invoice half crumpled, the ink slightly smudged by her trembling fingers. She had dreamt of Daniel, his calm voice, the distant look in his eyes as he handed her the bill. In the dream, he wasn't angry. He was gone, emotionally gone, and somehow that terrified her more than rage ever could. The clock on the wall read 7:48 a.m. Daniel was an early riser. He should have already been at work. But when she stepped into the kitchen, she froze. His keys were missing. His laptop was gone, and the framed photo of them in Santorini, the one he loved most, had vanished from the shelf. Panic crawled up her chest. She grabbed her phone, scrolling through their messages. The last one was from him, 2 days ago. Don't forget dinner at 7. Let's try that new Italian place. She never replied. Her fingers hovered over his contact, then dropped the phone. She didn't know what she would say. I'm sorry felt too small for what she'd done. Then she saw it, an unread email, sent at 6:02 a.m. The subject line read, Invoice copy, emotional investment. Her hands shook as she opened it. The same list, now in digital form, but this time there was an attached PDF titled Statement of Closure. She clicked it open. Statement of Closure. Clara, this is not revenge. It's record keeping, something I understand better than love, apparently. You always said I measured life in numbers. Maybe you were right. So here's the balance sheet of us. What I gave, what you took, what's left. You owe me nothing but honesty. Daniel. She pressed her hand over her mouth, choking on a sob. Every word felt colder than the next. It wasn't anger, it was detachment. That was what killed her. She replied instinctively, Daniel, please, can we talk? I made a mistake. I'll do anything to fix it. But no response came. By noon, she had called his office. His assistant, a polite woman named Julie, answered. I'm sorry, Mrs. Harris, but Daniel took a leave of absence this morning. Indefinite. Clara's stomach twisted. Indefinite. She sat by the window for hours, watching the city move as if nothing had happened. The traffic lights changed, the world spun, and somewhere out there, Daniel was walking away from everything they built. At 3 p.m., the intercom buzzed. A courier stood at the door holding a sleek black folder. "Delivery from Mrs. Clara Harris," he said. She signed for it, her heart pounding. Inside was another envelope, this one embossed with the logo of Harrison Financial Consulting. When she opened it, her breath caught. Non-disclosure and property agreement draft, prepared by Daniel Harris. Clause 3.4, all joint financial contributions, including but not limited to student loan payments, business startup capital, and property investments, shall be repaid in full in the event of marital dissolution instigated by infidelity. She dropped the papers. It wasn't just symbolic anymore. Daniel had meant it. The world tilted. She sat down slowly, staring at the wall as realization spread through her. He'd been planning this. Not the affair, but the aftermath. The man who once brought her morning coffee in bed had quietly built an exit strategy. Her mind flashed back to small things she hadn't noticed: the unopened letters on his desk, his late nights reviewing contracts, and the sudden interest in tidying up their joint accounts. He'd known something was wrong long before she confessed. That night, Clara poured herself a glass of wine, the same bottle from last night. It tasted bitter now. She opened her laptop and stared at a blank email draft. "Daniel," she typed, "if you think this will make me understand, it won't. You can't put a price on love." Then she paused. Her reflection on the screen looked foreign, tired, guilty, fragile. She deleted the line. "Daniel," she began again, "you were right. You always measured things in numbers. But maybe that's because love made no sense anymore. I don't know how to fix what I broke, but please don't erase me completely. Not yet." She hit send. Minutes passed, nothing. Then, a reply. "This isn't about erasing you, Clara. It's about remembering who I was before I loved you." The simplicity of it cut deeper than any accusation could. She sat back, tears slipping down her cheeks. Outside, the city lights blurred against the glass. The rain had returned, heavier now, a steady percussion against her guilt. Later that night, she found herself wandering through their shared photos on her phone. Trips, birthdays, lazy Sundays. In every picture, Daniel's eyes carried the same quiet devotion, the kind of love that didn't demand, didn't shout, it simply existed. She thought of Ethan then, the ex she'd risked everything for. The night they met again had been electric, yes, but empty. It wasn't love. It was escape. And now the price of that escape had arrived, neatly itemized in black and white. By midnight, she printed the invoice and pinned it to the refrigerator, not out of spite, but as punishment, a reminder that love, once broken, demanded payment in ways no money could settle. She sat in the dark, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. Her phone lit up once more, a message from Daniel. "The $90K was never about money, Clara. It's what I invested in us. I just needed you to see the cost of breaking something that was never for sale." Her tears fell silently. She wanted to call him, to beg him to come home, but she knew the man who'd written those words wasn't coming back tonight. Maybe not ever. When the clock struck 2, she finally whispered into the darkness, "I'll pay it, Daniel, whatever it takes." But the apartment stayed quiet. The only reply was the faint rustle of paper on the table, where the invoice lay like a verdict. Outside, the storm rolled in over Seattle, washing the streets clean, but not her conscience. The rain had a way of making memories surface. It was the same that morning, soft, gray, and endless, when Clara stood by the window, clutching a coffee mug she hadn't bothered to drink from. The bitterness in her mouth wasn't from caffeine, but from everything she hadn't said when it still mattered. Daniel hadn't come home for 3 days. The silence in their apartment was heavy, filled with echoes of his presence. The smell of his cologne still clinging to the hallway, the faint indentation of his body on the bed. She caught herself reaching for his pillow, pressing her face into it just to feel less alone. She thought of the first time they met. It was the summer of 2013, in a downtown Seattle cafe where Clara was sketching layouts for a client, headphones in, a mess of papers surrounding her. Daniel had been standing in line behind her, watching the barista spill espresso foam on the counter. When she dropped her pencil, he bent down to pick it up, and their hands brushed. "Architect?" he'd asked, glancing at her sketches. "Interior designer," she replied. "You?" "Finance. I make spreadsheets for a living." She laughed. "That sounds thrilling." He'd smiled. "Only if you like numbers more than people." Back then, he'd been charming in a quiet, awkward way. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke, who remembered the smallest details. Their first date wasn't even meant to be a date. It was a coffee chat that turned into a 4-hour walk by the waterfront. They ended the evening with no kiss, just a promise. "Let's not rush this." And they didn't. For years, their love grew slow and steady, like the city skyline outside their apartment window, built with patience and purpose. But somewhere between promotions, deadlines, and endless expectations, something shifted. Clara couldn't pinpoint when the warmth began to fade, only that one day she woke up and the space between them had become unbridgeable. Daniel's life had become a schedule: morning runs, meetings, bills, sleep. His affection was there, but muted, like background noise she could no longer hear. She remembered one evening 6 months ago when she came home from work, exhausted and lonely. Daniel was at his desk, reading financial reports. "Do you ever stop working?" He didn't look up. "Do you ever stop doubting me?" The words hit harder than he intended. They argued then, not about work, not about love, but about something deeper neither dared name: the fear of being unseen. Later that night, she scrolled through old messages from Ethan, her college ex, the one who once promised her the world before cheating on her with someone else. His name glowing on her phone screen felt like nostalgia disguised as comfort. She didn't mean to reply, but she did. Now, in the stillness of the apartment, those messages replayed in her head like a confession she couldn't rewind. "I always wondered what would have happened if I hadn't been stupid back then. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Can I see you? Just to talk?" She'd convinced herself it was harmless, a conversation, closure. But closure doesn't happen in hotel bars at midnight under the hum of low jazz and a second glass of wine. Closure isn't found in the warmth of an old touch that never truly healed. She pressed her palms to her face now, trembling. Shame was an endless echo. Her phone buzzed. A new message. From Julie, Daniel's assistant. "Hi, Clara. Daniel asked me to send you this. He wanted you to have access to your business account again. He removed his name from the joint balance. He said you'd understand." Clara's heart sank. It wasn't cruelty, it was detachment. He was erasing himself from her life, one signature at a time. That night, she wandered the apartment aimlessly. Every corner reminded her of who they had been. The bookshelf they built together from IKEA kits, arguing over which screws went where. The burnt mark on the counter from her first attempt at baking. The half-finished jigsaw puzzle they never completed. She ran her fingers along the framed photographs still left behind. Their wedding day, Lake Chelan, sunlight catching in her veil. Daniel's eyes in the picture were so alive, so full of belief. She wondered when that light had gone out. She sat at the dining table, took out her old sketchbook, and began to draw. Not furniture, not designs, but him. His hands, his face, the way he looked when he was thinking. Her tears blurred the pencil lines until his face became a shadow.
In the silence, she whispered to no one, "Where did we lose each other, Daniel?" Somewhere else in the city, Daniel sat in a rented apartment. Smaller, colder, temporary. The rain streaked the windows there too, and he was staring at an untouched dinner. He hadn't responded to her last email, though he'd read it 3 times. He opened his notebook, the same one he'd used for financial planning, and flipped to a page titled, "What Went Wrong?" Beneath it, he'd listed small things. Stopped listening. Stopped asking. Stopped trying. Then at the bottom, a final line. She stopped loving me before she realized it. He closed the notebook, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. He still loved her. That was the worst part. Love didn't end cleanly. It lingered like smoke. Back in the old apartment, Clara stood by the window again, the same place where her confession had shattered everything. She stared at the city below, people rushing to work, lovers walking hand in hand, strangers laughing under umbrellas. Life went on, indifferent. For the first time, she understood the cost of distance. Not the physical kind, but the emotional one built from years of silence and assumptions. The $90,000 had never been about money. It was a symbol, a ledger, of all the moments Daniel gave and she withdrew without realizing it. As dawn broke, Clara whispered into the quiet, "I miss you." In another part of the city, Daniel whispered the same words to no one. And though neither of them heard it, somehow the rain did, falling harder as if trying to bridge the distance between two hearts that once beat in rhythm, now painfully out of sync.
The days following Emily's confession were eerily quiet. The house that once echoed with laughter, arguments, and little everyday sounds, coffee brewing, music playing, had fallen into complete silence. David barely spoke. Emily tried, in small ways, to bridge the distance, placing his favorite mug by the coffee pot, leaving notes on the fridge, but her words no longer carried meaning. Everything felt artificial. And then, as if the universe wanted to pour salt into an open wound, he came back. It started with a text on Emily's phone. David didn't mean to see it, but the screen lit up on the counter as he passed by. The name was unmistakable. Ryan, the same ex she had admitted sleeping with. "Can we talk? I think we need closure," the message read. David stood there staring at the screen, his blood running cold. Closure? The word hit him like a slap. Hadn't she already had enough closure when she destroyed their marriage? That night, when Emily returned from her shift at the gallery, she found David sitting in the living room holding her phone. "Ryan texted," he said flatly. Her face went pale. "It's not what you think. He wants to talk." David gave a short, bitter laugh. "Of course he does. Men like him always want to talk after ruining something good." Emily's eyes glistened. "David, please. I didn't respond, I swear." "Then delete it," he said. His tone was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that comes when someone has already given up. She hesitated, just long enough for him to notice. "Why did you pause?" I just thought maybe I should tell him it's really over, for good." David stood up. "Emily, when you broke our vows, it was already over. You don't need to tell him. It's done." He walked away before she could reply, the echo of his footsteps filling the space between them. 2 days later, David came home to find a car parked in front of their driveway, a sleek silver BMW, too new, too polished for their quiet street. And leaning against it, wearing that same arrogant smirk from old pictures, was Ryan. David's first instinct was disbelief. His second was anger. Ryan stepped forward, hand extended, like they were two old friends meeting for coffee. "Hey man, I just wanted to clear the air." David didn't take his hand. "You've done enough." Emily came out then, face pale, eyes darting between them. "Ryan, you shouldn't have come." He smiled at her, ignoring David completely. "Em, we never really talked. I needed to see you, just once more." David felt something snap inside him. Not rage, but something colder. He stepped between them, his voice low but sharp. You had your chance years ago. You gave her up and she moved on. Now you show up here thinking you can just walk back into her life? Ryan raised his eyebrows. Easy, man. I'm not trying to steal her back. David took a step closer. Then why are you here? There was silence, until Ryan smirked again. Maybe I just wanted to remind her what real love used to feel like.
Before David could react, Emily spoke, her voice trembling. Stop it, Ryan. Please. You need to go. For a second, Ryan's confidence faltered. He looked at her, searching for something. Regret, longing, anything. But Emily's expression was pure exhaustion. This isn't love, she said softly. It's just guilt and nostalgia. Please leave. Ryan looked at David one last time, shrugged, and walked back to his car. You're lucky, man. She still defends you. The engine roared, and he was gone. That night, David sat alone in his office, staring at the half-finished divorce papers he'd printed weeks ago but never signed. Emily knocked softly on the door. Can I come in? He didn't answer, but she stepped in anyway. I didn't know he'd come, she said quietly. I believe you, David replied. She was surprised. You do? Yes, because you don't look at him the way you used to. You look at him like a mistake. Tears welled up in her eyes. He was a mistake, the biggest one of my life. David leaned back in his chair. Then why do I still feel like I'm paying for it every day? She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, small and broken. David, please, what can I do to fix this? He looked at her, really looked at her, the woman he once loved more than anything, now standing before him as a stranger wearing his wife's face. You can't fix it, Emily, he said softly. You can only face it, and so can I. He picked up the $90K invoice he'd made, a cruel, symbolic gesture born from pain, and handed it to her. This was never about money. It was about showing you what betrayal costs. Not in dollars, but in trust, peace, and time we can't get back. Emily took the paper, trembling. Then what happens now? David sighed. Now we live with the consequences, separately. He stood, walked past her, and paused at the door. When he showed up today, I realized something. You didn't just cheat on me. You made space for him to walk right back into our lives. And that space will never belong to me again. Emily's tears fell silently as the door closed behind him. Outside, the rain began to fall. Steady, relentless, washing over the memories of a love that once promised forever, but couldn't survive the return of the past.
The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. Every corner seemed to hum with absence, the faint smell of coffee he never brewed, the subtle echo of her laughter now gone, the untouched stack of mail he hadn't sorted. Daniel Harris had been gone for weeks, yet his presence lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. He had moved into a small, temporary apartment downtown, overlooking the gray waters of Elliott Bay. Sparse furniture, a folding desk, a chair, that was all he needed. No photographs, no reminders, no tokens of the life he had walked away from. He thought of it as a sanctuary, a place to breathe without the weight of betrayal oppressing on his chest. Yet silence wasn't freedom, it was a mirror, reflecting back every misstep, every compromise he had allowed, every quiet disappointment he had swallowed for years. He had always believed in measured responses, in calculated decisions, but now, faced with Clara's confession, he realized there were some wounds numbers couldn't account for. Each morning, Daniel woke with the same ritual. He brewed coffee, black, no sugar, staring out at the fog settling over the bay. The city's lights flickered in the mist like distant stars, unreachable and cold. He opened his laptop, not to work, but to revisit files, spreadsheets, and documents, the very structure he once used to control his life. Now, it was a shield. He had drafted letters, dozens of them, unsent, unread. Some were meant to confront Clara, others to explain himself, some simply to pour out the emotions he could not speak aloud. Each one ended the same way, unfinished, ink running in metaphorical loops of anger, hurt, and lingering love. Daniel's silence wasn't emptiness, it was vigilance. Every decision, every emotion was measured, stored, cataloged. He checked their bank accounts, adjusted transfers, reviewed their shared assets, not out of spite, but because control was the only thing left that made sense. He remembered the night Clara confessed. The words echoed in his head. "I slept with my ex last night." They had shattered more than trust. They shattered the rhythm of his life. He remembered the way she had stood, trembling, waiting for a reaction he refused to give. He had said nothing then, only delivered the $90K love bill, the coldest, most calculated act of clarity he could muster. Silence had been his weapon, and it had worked. But it also revealed the hollowness of their intimacy, the truth that love cannot survive without reciprocity, without presence. Days blurred into weeks. Clara had sent emails, messages, even a few attempts at phone calls. Each one met with Daniel's measured absence. He read them all, every single word, but never replied. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. He needed her to see the cost of her actions, not in anger, not in tears, but in consequence. And yet, under that carefully constructed wall, Daniel wrestled with his own feelings. He missed her. He missed the sound of her laughter filling the apartment. He missed the small ways she left traces of herself behind: a sweater draped over a chair, a mug on the counter, a pen she had borrowed from his desk. The memories were bittersweet, painful reminders of what he had once cherished.
Late at night, when the city had quieted and the hum of distant traffic was the only sound, Daniel opened one of the letters he had written that first night after the confession. "Clara," it began, "I know I cannot demand your love, nor can I ignore the betrayal that cuts deeper than any wound I have known. I have loved you more than reason, more than time, more than myself, and yet love alone does not repair the fractures that have formed. I am leaving not because I don't care, but because I must. I must preserve the part of me that is not shattered." He read the words and felt the sting of his own honesty. No reply would come, no apology could fix it, yet the act of writing allowed him to release a fraction of the weight pressing on his chest. Daniel's friends noticed the change. At lunch one afternoon, his colleague Mark asked, "You okay, man? You've been distant." Daniel smiled faintly. "Just taking some time." Mark didn't press. He knew enough about Daniel to understand that some things could not be rushed, that some wounds required space to bleed quietly before they healed. Meanwhile, Clara's sporadic attempts to reach him seemed to only confirm his distance. He didn't ignore her out of spite, he ignored her to preserve himself. Each day of silence was a boundary, a reminder that while trust might be negotiable, dignity was not. Evenings were the hardest. He would sit in the corner of a small living room, the city lights bleeding through the blinds, and think of the apartment they had shared. The memory of her lying beside him, the warmth of her hand on his chest, the soft rhythm of her breathing, all of it haunted him. He thought about the future, about what it meant to forgive, to forget, to move forward. The $90,000 invoice was more than money. It was a statement of self-respect. But now, in the quiet, he realized that the cost had been far greater than any sum could represent. Silence, he discovered, was not emptiness. It was a reckoning. It forced both of them to confront the consequences of desire, of mistakes, and of human frailty. It was not punishment, of education, painful, slow, and absolute. By the third week, Daniel had begun organizing his life for a version that didn't include Clara. He arranged meetings with lawyers, updated his accounts, and started planning projects he had shelved for years. Yet, every now and then, he paused, caught between the life he had loved and the one he now needed to inhabit. He realized that silence wasn't the absence of love, it was the recognition that love, once violated, could no longer function the same way. It had to be measured,
guarded, protected. And for now, Daniel Harris would measure it in absence, a silence more powerful than any words could convey. That night, as rain tapped against the window, he wrote one final note, not for Clara, not for anyone, but for himself. I cannot undo the past. I cannot force forgiveness. I can only live honestly, silently, and learn to breathe again without her in my arms. He folded the note and tucked it into his desk drawer. The city slept, unaware of the quiet storm within one of its most ordinary apartments, where a man learned that sometimes silence speaks louder than the most eloquent words.
The days after Daniel's disappearance stretched like a taut wire, fragile and threatening to snap at any moment. Clara moved through the apartment like a ghost, her footsteps hesitant, avoiding the spaces he once occupied. Every cup, every pen, every corner bore traces of his presence. The city outside carried on as if oblivious, but inside, time seemed to have fractured. Her phone buzzed constantly, with messages from friends, family, and colleagues, all offering advice, support, or subtle judgment. "You need to fix this," one text read. "He's too good for this," said another. Clara felt suffocated, overwhelmed by their well-meaning but useless words. None of them understood that Daniel's silence was heavier than any anger, more precise than any confrontation. At work, she struggled to focus. The gallery she managed required creativity, patience, and attention, but her mind wandered constantly. She would catch herself staring at blank canvases, the same way she used to watch Daniel's calm expressions, searching for clues she had ignored for too long. The memory of his hand placing the $90K invoice on the counter replayed in her mind like a sinister lullaby. The fallout wasn't just emotional. The house itself became a battlefield of reminders. Daniel had methodically removed his belongings, his laptop, the few books he treasured, even the small succulent that sat on the windowsill. The apartment felt smaller now, though it hadn't changed in size. She wandered from room to room, sometimes standing in silence, listening for him, imagining his presence, hearing the ghost of conversations long past. One evening, a letter arrived, stamped, formal, and unmistakably Daniel's handwriting. Her hands shook as she tore it open. Inside was a simple note. "Clara, I hope you understand the cost of choices. Love is not transactional, but trust is. Take care of yourself. Daniel." The brevity of it stung worse than any long accusation could. There were no excuses, no explanations, no apologies, just clarity. Clara sank to the couch, clutching the note to her chest. Her tears fell freely, unrestrained, as she remembered all the small betrayals she had inflicted on their marriage. The subtle lies, the distracted conversations, the nights she had chosen convenience over honesty. Daniel's silence had become a mirror, reflecting the true extent of her failings. Friends came to visit, trying to bridge the gap, to offer consolation. Yet she found herself retreating, unable to speak the words that might repair the damage. "He's gone," she whispered once to a friend, voice breaking. "He's really gone. And it's my fault." At the office, whispers of gossip began. People asked questions, speculated about the fallout, and Clara realized that the world itself had become a kind of tribunal. She had betrayed not only her husband, but the perception of stability, loyalty, and propriety that people expected from her. The shame was nearly physical.
Then came the calls from Daniel's business partners. Professional matters that once ran smoothly now required delicate negotiations. He had placed Clara in a position of responsibility she wasn't ready for, testing her ability to manage without him. Every email, every meeting, every decision reminded her of the life they had built together and the parts she had unraveled. Even outside the apartment, she felt eyes on her. Strangers, acquaintances, people at cafes and stores where she and Daniel had once visited together. She felt exposed, vulnerable, a woman stripped bare by her own choices. One night, she returned home to find the rain hammering against the windows,
a storm rising with a kind of fury she hadn't seen since Daniel left. She lit a single lamp and sat on the floor, staring at the empty space where his chair had once been. The silence was deafening. She imagined him in his temporary apartment, writing letters she would never read, staring out at the gray bay, enduring the quiet that she had caused. She opened her sketchbook and began to draw, not architectural lines or gallery designs, but abstract shapes that captured the turmoil inside her. Every pencil stroke felt like an apology, every line a silent plea for redemption. Yet she knew no sketch, no note, no gesture could undo what had been broken. The days passed. The weeks passed. Daniel remained silent. Clara felt the weight of absence like a physical presence pressing down on her chest. Sleep became sporadic, meals tasteless, her mind replaying every moment, the confession, the invoice, the letters, the empty spaces. Then one evening, she opened her email to find a message she had almost stopped expecting. Clara, I hope the silence has taught you something you couldn't learn in words. Choices have consequences. Time has a way of revealing truths. Use this to grow, to reflect, to rebuild, but not with me. Daniel. She dropped her phone. The finality of it crushed her. Daniel had not only left, he had ensured that the lessons of their union would echo in her life forever. The fallout was complete. Emotional, practical, spiritual. She had been forced to confront the magnitude of her betrayal, the fragility of trust, and the enduring cost of human desire. Sitting alone in the dim light, Clara finally allowed herself to grieve. Not just for Daniel, but for the version of herself that had existed before that night. The woman who thought one night of weakness could be forgotten, the woman who believed love could survive infidelity, the woman who had not yet learned that actions have consequences far deeper than money or apologies could reach. Outside, the storm passed, leaving the city washed clean. But inside Clara, the aftermath lingered. The silence Daniel had imposed was a verdict, a punishment, a lesson, and a mirror, all at once. And in that quiet, she began the slow, painful process of reckoning with the fallout of her own choices.
The tension was palpable the moment Clara stepped into Daniel's office. She had avoided this meeting for weeks, even as the legal papers for divorce sat unsigned on her kitchen counter. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it wanted to escape, but she forced herself to move forward, knowing that silence had brought them nothing but emptiness. Daniel stood by the window, looking out over the city. The skyline was veiled in mist, gray and silent, just like the weeks and unspoken words between them. When he turned, his expression was calm, almost unreadable, but Clara could see the restraint, the control he always wielded with precision. "Clara," he said quietly, not as a greeting, but as a recognition of her presence. She swallowed hard. "Daniel, I needed to see you. I can't keep living in this purgatory of silence." He raised an eyebrow. "And yet you took this long." "I know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to, process everything. I've been trying to understand how I could betray you, how I could sleep with him." Daniel finished for her, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp. The words hung in the air like smoke. Clara felt the old weight of guilt pressing down, heavy and suffocating. She wanted to explain, to justify, but the truth was blunt and simple. She had been weak. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said finally. I need to be honest with you now, completely. I want you to know I regret it. Every moment, every lie, every decision that led me here." Daniel studied her, silent. His hands rested on the edge of the desk, fingers interlaced. He had rehearsed this moment countless times in his mind, imagining what she would say, what he would feel, and how he might respond. But nothing could prepare him for the rawness of it. Her trembling voice,
the vulnerability she had not allowed him to see before. You caused a wound, one that doesn't just heal with an apology, one that doesn't disappear when you beg for my attention or try to explain. Love isn't measured in contrition, Clara. It's measured in trust. And you shattered that. Her eyes filled with tears. I know. I know I broke everything we built, and I'm ready to face whatever it takes. I'll accept the consequences, Daniel, even if it means losing you forever. He shook his head slightly, a mix of frustration and sorrow in his gaze. It's not just about consequences. It's about understanding, about seeing clearly why it happened and whether what we had was ever strong enough to survive human weakness.
The words cut deeper than any rage could. Clara realized that the confrontation wasn't only about her guilt or his betrayal of trust by leaving. It was about truth, raw, painful, unflinching. I was lonely, she confessed, voice breaking. I felt unseen, unheard, and I made a terrible mistake. I sought something outside because I didn't know how to ask you for what I needed. Daniel's jaw tightened. Do you think your loneliness excuses it or justifies the destruction of what we had? No, she whispered, it doesn't. Not at all. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for understanding. Maybe just acknowledgement that I failed, not to erase it, but to face it with honesty. He leaned back against the desk, studying her carefully. For the first time, the tension between them shifted, not toward anger, but toward the fragile truth that sometimes honesty hurts more than betrayal. Do you know why I stayed silent? He asked, his voice low. Not because I was indifferent, not because I didn't feel pain, but because I needed to see if you could bear the weight of your choices, if you could confront them fully. Clara's lips trembled. I think I understand now. Daniel moved closer, slowly, deliberately. He placed his hand on the edge of the desk, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the residual warmth of his presence. I had to know whether you still had the courage to face what you did, whether you could take responsibility. And here you are. Her chest ached. The man she had once loved, the man she had betrayed, was standing before her, wounded, controlled, and distant, yet still willing to meet her in this painful moment of truth. I do, she said. I can't undo it, but I can live with it. I can try to be better, to understand what I lost and why. I don't want to hide from it anymore. Daniel's eyes softened slightly, a shadow of the warmth he had once carried in his gaze. Then maybe this is where we start. Not as a couple, not as lovers, not even as friends necessarily, but as two people who are willing to confront the truth, together or apart. Clara nodded, tears spilling freely now. Together or apart, she echoed. For the first time since the confession, the air between them was not tense with accusation, but heavy with possibility, the fragile, uncertain kind that only truth can create. It was not a resolution, nor a reconciliation. It was a confrontation stripped of pretense, raw and necessary, a moment where honesty had replaced illusion. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Rain had given way to a cold, clear night, the lights of Seattle reflecting off wet streets. Inside, the storm of their emotions had settled into a fragile calm. For Daniel and Clara, the confrontation had revealed the limits of love, the cost of mistakes, and the beginning of a reckoning they could no longer avoid. As Clara left the office that night, Daniel remained by the window, silent, watching her walk into the city. He didn't call her back, he didn't reach out, but he knew one thing. The confrontation had changed something fundamental. The silence that followed was no longer punishment. It was the space where understanding, reflection, and perhaps one day, forgiveness could take root.
Months had passed since the confrontation. The city moved on in its indifferent rhythm, people rushing to work, cafes buzzing with conversation, ferries gliding across the gray waters of Elliott Bay. For Daniel and Clara, however, time had a different cadence. Deliberate, reflective, and measured by the distance they had chosen to maintain. Clara had moved out of their shared apartment, settling into a smaller loft on the opposite side of the city. The space was sparse, deliberately so.
a reminder that she no longer had the security of someone else's presence to fill her gaps. She spent her days at the gallery, immersed in art, color, and light, using creation as both penance and therapy. Each brushstroke was a meditation, a recognition of mistakes, a quiet promise to herself to never repeat them. Daniel, meanwhile, had returned to his downtown apartment overlooking the bay. He had restored routines, rebalanced his accounts, and immersed himself in work, but he allowed himself to pause more often now, to reflect, to breathe, to remember without being consumed by the past. Silence, once a weapon and shield, had transformed into a space for clarity. He no longer carried the raw ache of betrayal so openly. Instead, it existed as a quiet, almost imperceptible hum beneath his daily life. They spoke occasionally, at first carefully, in short emails and sparse phone calls. It was procedural at first, questions about joint finances, legal documents, and household items, but gradually the exchanges became gentler, more human. Neither rushed toward reconciliation, nor did either pretend that the past had not happened. They spoke with honesty, a shared understanding that what was lost could not be reclaimed, but what remained could still be honored. One evening, Clara sent a message he did not expect. "Daniel, I visited the gallery tonight and thought of the first exhibition we saw together. I realized I can honor what we had without holding on to what's broken." He paused before replying. The words formed slowly, deliberately, carrying the weight of months of reflection. "Clara, I understand. Thank you. For everything. Even the lessons that hurt the most. May we both find peace in the lives we choose to build." It was not a declaration of renewed love, but it was closure, the kind that stems not from reconciliation, but from understanding, acceptance, and respect. Both recognized that love could take many forms, and sometimes the most profound act of care was allowing each other to live fully, even if apart. Clara found solace in her independence, discovering depths of resilience she had not known she possessed. She rebuilt relationships with friends and family that had frayed under the strain of betrayal. She allowed herself to grieve for what she had lost, and in that grief she found clarity. Each day became a conscious choice to move forward, to act with integrity, and to embrace the lessons etched deeply into her heart.
Daniel, for his part, found peace in structure and reflection. He explored new projects at work with renewed energy, dedicated time to personal growth, and began mentoring younger colleagues, sharing not only professional insights, but subtle lessons about honesty, boundaries, and the complexity of human relationships. His heart, though scarred, was steady. The $90K invoice he had once presented as a symbol of betrayal now existed as a metaphor, a ledger of trust, responsibility, and the consequences that define the human experience. On an unusually clear morning in late October, Daniel walked along the waterfront. The sun broke through the clouds, glinting off the water, warm on his face. He paused at a bench they had once sat on together, recalling long conversations about art, travel, and dreams they had nurtured. The memories were bittersweet, but no longer painful. He allowed himself to smile quietly, acknowledging the past without longing for its return. Clara, visiting a client's installation on the other side of the city, felt a similar sense of closure. Standing before a mural she had helped design, she reflected on the months of turmoil, introspection, and growth. The mistakes, the betrayal, the distance, they had all led her here, to a place of self-awareness and resilience. She understood that love and forgiveness were not always intertwined, and that letting go could be as profound an act as holding on. Though they remained apart, a subtle, unspoken respect endured. They had faced the rawest elements of human imperfection: infidelity, anger, silence, and loss. In confronting these truths, they had discovered the limits of control, the necessity of honesty, and the quiet dignity that comes from accepting consequences without resentment. At night, when the city lights reflected on wet streets and the occasional ferry horn echoed across the bay, both Daniel and Clara would occasionally glance at a photograph, a memory, or a message, and feel neither regret nor longing, but understanding. They had loved deeply, erred grievously, and learned the most essential lesson of all: that human hearts are fragile, trust is precious, and life moves forward, often in ways we cannot predict, but can choose to navigate with grace. The final pages of their story were not filled with reconciliations, dramatic confessions, or cinematic reunions. They were composed of quiet acceptance, mutual recognition, and the courage to carry forward. Daniel would build his life anew, Clara would forge her path, and both would carry the imprint of love, betrayal, and growth as a compass guiding them through the complexities of human connection. And in the end, that was enough.